Whitewater, a city of 14,000 that straddles Walworth and Jefferson counties. 9 square miles of neat, modest homes, better than average schools, and the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. On the surface, it's all Midwestern, middle-class, mayonnaise mundaneness. So why do they call it the Second Salem? Could there be another Whitewater? A darker, more sinister side to this overgrown Mayberry RFD? Well, there certainly are stories. Stories of witches, ghastly spirits, and dark deeds.
I live in Whitewater, and according to legends, the whole town is haunted. The university that's in that town was originally built as a school for mediums and research into the paranormal. I've been told that all possible ways to leave the town require going over running water, and that the cemeteries form a 5-pointed star when looked at from above. There's a hill behind the student dorms that's supposed to be where the coven of witches, evil ones of course, meet. Also, an apartment building was once the residence of a guy who fancied himself a master of the black arts, and is haunted. Whitewater has been referred to as the Second Salem. I can attest that some areas of the town just really give me the creeps. The problem is this. There is reputed to be documentation telling about the weird things in town. However, the town council has made sure that none of that exists in town anymore. Jeff Woosley.
Hello? Welcome.
This is the Two Cities.
Oh, I'm so excited.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Tales of Two Cities podcast. I'm Nikki, and we're going to start this episode with a few updates. First, I'm sure you all know that we have merch. We're really good at telling all of you. But we have some new merch, both designs from other really cool artists that we love that are available in our shop, and a new design that our friend Spike has kindly drawn for us. We actually have a few, but here's the other update. We're going to save them and release them as we gain pledges in our newly launched Patreon. We have a ton of different pledge levels with some really cool rewards available. Check it out. The link is available on our social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, our website, and our SoundCloud profile. And for those of you who hate all of those things, you can just find it at www.patreon.com/tales-of-2-cities-pod. Again, that's www.patreon.com/tales-of-2-cities-pod. So what the heck was Jeff talking about? In this episode, we're going to take a tour of a haunted town, one that's said to be the Second Salem. Then Ellie will share a tale from another Wisconsin town, also connected to witchcraft and darkness. This episode is inspired by an email by Lisa, who wrote to us telling us about the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, which was described in the email as, quote, haunted as fuck. In this episode, we will give you a tour of the town and focus on a few interesting tales. So think of this like a quick stroll through 2 Wisconsin towns, but instead of wholesome shops and cheery parks, you'll hear about witches and hell. Whitewater, Wisconsin was founded at the confluence of the Whitewater Creek and the Spring Brook. It was the white sand in the beds of these moving waters which named the town. It was a settlement of New Englanders, English Puritans, who found home in North America. They were part of a wave of colonist farmers who headed west to the Northwest Territory during the 1800s. Most of these settlers came as a result of completion of the Erie Canal. Whitewater was then only a dense forest and prairie. But soon, the settlers had built roads, farms, and government buildings. They brought with them their religious beliefs, paired with the burgeoning Yankee values, such as abolitionism and education. Most were members of the Congregationalist Church. Others were Episcopalian. Whitewater followed its Yankee roots for most of its early cultural history, following the path of most New England culture. In 1853, the first railway line in Wisconsin was built. In 1958, the first two law enforcement officers, James Schramm and Dominic Odell, were hired to patrol the village. The University of Wisconsin-Whitewater began as Whitewater Normal School in 1868 when it was dedicated. The first class of teachers graduated in June 1870. In 1893, Albert Salisbury said of Whitewater's graduates, quote, "The young men and women who gathered in this school in the early years found a new and stimulating atmosphere." In 1927, the school received authority to grant baccalaureate degrees in education and changed the name to Whitewater Teachers College. In 1951, liberal arts programs were added and the school became the Wisconsin State College, Whitewater, and later designated a Wisconsin State University in 1964. But it wasn't until 1971 that the school was given the name it bears today, the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. It was UW-Whitewater that our dear listener Lisa wrote to us about. In an email, Lisa told us that Whitewater and the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater is haunted as fuck. So let's begin our tour of the place known as the Second Salem. The town is described by many as having dark secrets. One local mentioned that ghost stories were a dime a dozen in Whitewater. But let's look at some specific places, explore some of these strange happenings. One of the most prominent locations is Starren Park. Located right across the street from the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, it doesn't look like much during the day, and it isn't the park itself that is the draw, but the 80-foot water tower built in 1889. It has recently been designated a historical landmark. The tower, made of limestone from a local quarry, seems benign enough, but it's the locus for many local legends. One of the most prominent is, you guessed it, related to witches. The most recent report of witches was back in 1992 when 3 students watched a late-night ritual on the beach near Whitewater Lake. They were too frightened to continue watching when it appeared as though a large object was coming out of the lake. We'll talk more about this later, but many freshmen have claimed to see a coven of witches meeting in the area near campus. It's rumored that the water tower is where they meet to conjure malevolent spirits using dark magic. At one time, the tower was surrounded by a large iron fence with sharp spikes, but the spikes were pointed inward, as though to keep things in rather than out. It's said that the witches would travel between the town's oldest homes and the water tower through an underground tunnel system to remain hidden from the public. They're said to surround the tower at night, performing rituals connected to evil and the profane. Locals say there are more stories, that they have grown more strange and persistent, but they remain undocumented. Some think that students are just too frightened to say anything for fear of making it worse. The tower sits just south of Wells Hall, which also has had many hauntings since its construction in the 1960s. Perhaps this is where the freshmen were when they saw the rituals at the water tower. Most hauntings related to Wells Hall are about young adults who have died in tragic accidents. Other places on campus have also been rumored to be haunted, including the Alpha Sigma sorority house, in which the girls heard loud noises coming from their basement while eating dinner one night in 1981. They went to investigate, and they found bricks scattered around the basement, revealing a tunnel that they had never seen before. Perhaps some proof of the tunnels the witches were said to have used? Some believe the tunnels to be remnants of the Underground Railway, hideouts for escaping slaves. Even if this isn't true, it doesn't mean that they weren't also the Witch Highway. But this is just one of the reasons Whitewater is known as the country's Second Salem. Another is housed in the Anderson Library. There's a book that's denied to exist by librarians and other library employees, but people say that the book is responsible for a handful of deaths. It's reportedly written by, you guessed it, the Whitewater Witches. It's said to be so terrifying that it's driven people to suicide, including 3 students and a professor. Another person who once borrowed the book is said to have been locked in a mental institution. There are rumors that the book has been under lock and key in a hidden part of the library for the protection of the public. Some say that if you ask for the book, you'll be expelled. Others say the staff are trained to act as though they don't know what you're talking about. Karen Weston, UW-Whitewater's archivist of 27 years, contradicts this. Quote, "The only locked down book we own is actually a Catholic hymnal. We think the stories about it come from the fact that up until 1989, 100 years after the Morris Pratt Institution was found, I'm going to tell you about this soon too, the storage we used for the book was a lock cage because it's the only storage unit we had. A locked book in a special collection's got this image of being dangerous. However, none of the people who've ever talked about this Catholic hymnal have given us a publisher, a title, an author, no date, nothing. End quote. Perhaps this emphasis on witchcraft in Whitewater is rooted in the town's association with spiritualism. If you remember our episode, Frauds, Foxes, and Fairies, spiritualism gripped the nation. People began to be fascinated with the supernatural and the possibility that people could interact with the other side. If you haven't yet, head back and check out that episode. Though Whitewater became known as a mecca of modern spiritualism, partially due to an association with Morris Pratt. Pratt was inspired after a visit to a spiritualist center in Lake Mills. He was so inspired by what he saw there that he pledged his time and money to occult studies if he were ever to be rich. Soon, his Red Indian psychic guide, Mary Hayes, told him of iron mineral deposits that had yet to be discovered. He was soon a very rich man. He fulfilled his promise and built the Morris Pratt Institute in 1889. The building was the most expensive in Whitewater at the time. There were dormitories, lecture halls, a chapel, and an all-white room for seances. Classes at the school included curriculum such as spiritualism, the occult, and the paranormal. Quote, "That's probably the spookiest thing in Whitewater, the old Morris Pratt School," Weston said. When Pratt died in 1902, the school continued to operate for several more years. Classes officially ended in Whitewater in 1936 during the Great Depression. It was then turned into a telephone office. The Morris Pratt Institute still offers classes, though in Milwaukee today. And, like all good haunted towns, there are some peculiarities surrounding the cemeteries. Those who have listened since the beginning will remember our first episode, which looked at the Pioneer Cemetery in Eugene, Oregon, and the Hollywood Forever in Los Angeles, California. Though we've covered many others since, this one's different from those we've covered previously. Whitewater has 3 cemeteries that form a triangle when connected on a map, known as Witch's Triangle. Others report it being a pentagram, but with only 3, I'm not quite sure how that works. The 3 cemeteries, Oak Grove, Calvary, and Hillside, and the area inside of the triangle they form, is said to be haunted. Weston explained, quote, "There was a coffin of a little girl mysteriously put on campus back in 1970 during Halloween week. People think it was taken from one of those local cemeteries," end quote. Calvary Cemetery is said to have gates that close on freshmen who sneak in at night. And in 2003, a professor and several other people saw a strange flying object. Some believed that it was a UFO, but perhaps it was just an infamous ghost. Oak Grove Cemetery is home to an even more peculiar tale, one that we've mentioned before, Bloody Mary. Most know the traditional Bloody Mary story. You chant her name in a bathroom, usually alone at night or maybe with a group of girls. Bloody Mary will appear to you. There are many variations, though the history of Bloody Mary is actually rooted in Whitewater, allegedly. The Mary who had become known as Bloody Mary is said to be Mary Worth, who's rumored to be buried in Oak Grove. Mary Worth is rumored to be an axe murderess, a slave torturer, and a mourning mother, among many other variations of the tale. On Halloween Eve, legend says that Mary can be spotted among the tombstones, looking for new victims to kill with her axe. But this isn't over. There's more. Whitewater Lake is said to be connected to the witches' rituals. In 1923, some fishermen claimed their boat was dragged underwater by a creature with long tentacles. They struggled to get the boat back up, but when they did, they noticed bite marks. And back to the story of 1992. 3 people who were renting a house on the lake said they heard a group of people chanting on the beach until they heard loud gurgling, and they saw something rise out of the lake. The 3 fled the house, and when police investigated, they only found small bones scattered where the witches had stood. So what makes this place the second Salem? Most people would cite the Morris Pratt Institute for bringing in those with an inclination or fascination with the supernatural. Others think that the Coven of Witches may be real, that they practice rituals in the field behind Wells Hall or in the Oak Grove Cemetery. Some even mention that there's an altar and several dead Coven members that are buried where the altar once stood. According to our dear listener Lisa, this place is haunted as fuck. But what do you think?
Located on County Road R, Wisconsin, sits a ruined building that once stood tall and proud. The Maribel Caves Hotel, also known as the Cherney Hotel, was built by Austrian immigrant Charles Steinbrecher in 1900, and it was originally named after the nearby Maribel limestone caves. The caves were formed by glacial activity, so go science. However, the point is that it created a series of hiking paths and natural springs that were coveted by many. The basic skeletal architecture of the building resembles the classic styles of European theme. The hotel operated as a therapeutic spa where, stated in their brochure, the, quote, tired and worn may be invigorated, end quote. Utilizing the natural spring water, the hotel offered natural remedies for various ailments. So, like the caves, and like I said before, it was coveted by many for its spa offerings. After the railroad was built through Maribel, the inn became a hotspot for leisure and restoration from the rigorous life of the middle and upper class. The guests of the inn enjoyed the medicinal uses of the mineral water so much that a bottling plant was built next to the hotel. The water was bottled and also made into soda water and shipped to restaurants and fine hotels in Milwaukee and Chicago. However, all giants must crumble, and the business went under in 1915. The hotel was leased and eventually purchased in 1935 to Adolph Cherney. When Prohibition was introduced and the 18th Amendment was passed in 1920, booze became sought after. This opened doors for notorious bootleggers and organized crime, to the point that they became the true leaders of the Free State. According to reports, John Dillinger allegedly frequented the hotel as a stopover on his way to Eagle River. It is also said that the notorious gangster Al Capone was known to visit the hotel. The building would later reopen in 1981 when it was purchased by Jeff Miller. In 1985, the historic structure was engulfed by a fire, leaving the once great building a ruin. The building, with what is left, stands particularly intact following the tornado that ripped through the area in 2013. With something so decayed, strange rumors have circulated around the hotel. It is known that the hotel has burned 3 times on the same date and glows under a full moon. There are rumors that the skeletal remains are still on an unreachable 3rd floor. I couldn't find out why they were there, just that they are. Also, many have claimed to have seen a figure of a man that continually looms in various windows around the building, always facing out. Maybe the spirit of the skeletal remains? Visitors have experienced feeling cold hands on their back as they walked through the ruins. The caves also have some lore. Some have heard voices and shrieks coming from the basement and the caves below. Since there are caves nearby, some believe that underground passageways exist. Others have sworn that stones and other objects move on their own accord. Like any abandoned place, for example, Ohio's Helltown, check out our episode on Ohio, rumors of Satanism or the occult have always been associated with it. Supposedly, black witches performed a ceremony that opened the portal to hell in the front yard fountain. This is where the idea of Hotel Hell comes from. There's a belief that the front of the building is actually a portal to hell. The hellish demons haunted the town of Maribel until a white witch sealed the portal. Pretty epic for a small town in Wisconsin. Or is that what generally happens in a state famous for its cheese?
Thanks for listening. We appreciate each of you. It really helps us when you rate, review, and subscribe. So do so on the listening platform of your choice: iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and YouTube. And let us know what you think. We really do love hearing from you. I know that we say it a lot, but it really makes our day. So hit us up on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or email us at talesofcitiespodcast@gmail.com. That's talesofcitiespodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget that we have merch and our newly launched Patreon with really rad rewards for each level of pledge. Until next time.